Hello and welcome to Beyond Boundaries. So happy to have you with me. I'm your host, Justin Douglas. If you want to learn more about me or find the show notes for this episode, you can go to pastorjustindouglas.com. You can interact there with feedback, comments, and questions, or you can reach out via Instagram. I'm at Pastor Justin Douglas. Today is episode 11, and yeah, I know this has been the longest break between episodes. For 2 weeks in March, I was in Israel and Palestine. I feel like I'm just now starting to get back into the rhythm of things, but I promise it was worth the wait. I traveled to New York City earlier this week to interview pastor, liturgist, and author Aaron Niequest. His book is titled The Eternal Current: How a Practice-Based Faith Can Save Us from Drowning. I think our conversation was great. I'm so thankful that Aaron took time out of his day to be on the Beyond Boundaries podcast. I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation. Here it is, episode 11, The Eternal Current with Aaron Niequest. All right, so I'm here with Aaron Niequest, a liturgist and creator of A New Liturgy and the Practice, author of The Eternal Current: How a Practice-Based Faith Can Save Us from Drowning. And I love what your Instagram bio says: my heart belongs to Shauna, Henry, and Mac.
Yep.
So welcome to the Beyond Boundaries podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, do you want to just share a little bit about what you think about practice-based faith? You wrote a book about it, and I mean, obviously that's a very broad question.
Sure.
But I think you say it can save us from drowning, and I guess I want to, if someone was to be considering maybe picking up that book, what are some things that they might find when we talk about practice-based faith?
Yeah, wow. We're just jumping in.
Jumping right in, man.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, how about this? I will meet your broad question with a broad answer, and then you just pull me into any specifics.
Yeah.
I think I primarily mean a practice-based faith in contrast to a beliefs-based faith.
So good, yeah.
And that beliefs-based faith, which fundamentally is all that matters is what facts you hold in your head correctly.
Yeah.
And that, I grew up in a very conservative version of that. It was all about rightness. Do you believe rightly? Now, who gets to decide rightly? We do.
Yeah, of course. Our tribe is the right tribe and every other one's wrong. Yeah.
But I just experienced, now, beliefs matter.
Yeah.
Beliefs
and you say that in the book.
Important.
You say that in the book, yeah.
Yes, but they are not the goal. In the book, I say, Jesus didn't say, here is the truth, believe it.
Yeah.
Jesus said, I am the truth. Follow me. Join me. And so there's this sense that beliefs matter, but they are not enough. And in fact, when we put what's not meant to be the center at the center, it gets really toxic.
Yeah.
And so right in the first chapter of the book, I mentioned I found myself right out of college. I went to, grew up in a Christian family, went to a Christian college, got a job at a Christian church, and then my Christian faith imploded. And some of it was just if this whole story is just, do I believe the right stuff? Life's too short for that.
Yeah.
There's got to be more. There has got to be more. And thank God there is.
Yeah.
And I think some of the practices are the ways that we're invited to not just agree intellectually, but to participate with what God is doing. Not just believe, grace is true, but to swim in grace.
Yeah.
To extend grace, to participate in grace. So
that's so good. Yeah. I love, there were multiple places where you had fitness or nutrition metaphors. And I caught those because you were like, no one's going to gather together every week with a running group and talk about running a marathon.
Absolutely.
And just get the head knowledge for what it takes. It does take a certain amount of mental strength to run for that long. And you can maybe sit there and talk about the type of mental strength it takes, or sit there and talk about the proper stride to have. But if you're never practicing the stride, and if you're never putting yourself in a situation to actually have to build up the mental strength and fortitude, it's like, could you actually run a marathon?
Right.
Like, probably not. Yet you could be the most educated person in how to run a marathon, but you've never practiced running, and so you can't do it. And same with nutrition. You use the similar reality of just having one meal and only, and so I thought those were really good metaphors as someone who grew up in a very similar kind of culture.
Sure.
To consider as we enter into that. Now, what if someone's listening to this and they're like, spiritual practices? So what are we talking about when we talk about spiritual practices? Because I know in my particular community, there's some people who have, a ritualistic attachment to some of these practices, or those practices are attached to a community that if you did the practices the right way, you reached an elite level of spirituality. But if you didn't, you did. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Like it was almost like the practices were used as a gauge for your commitment to God.
Oh yeah.
So share a little bit about that. If someone's maybe hearing spiritual practices and it might be a little trigger for them of like, I don't know about that.
Absolutely. Spiritual practices, like everything else, have been abused, have been turned into, determining whether you're good enough. Some of the real dangers of spiritual practices is when we believe that if we do them right, we cause God to do stuff.
Oh, wow.
If I can just do this practice perfectly, then God has to answer my prayer. Guess what? God gets to do whatever God wants. But what's beautiful, and one of the central reasons I'm still a Christian, is because I believe God wants to.
Yeah.
God is constantly pouring blessing, life, wholeness, hope, mercy into the world. It's like another image that helps me so much is just imagining myself and everyone else on earth. We are standing under this waterfall that pours blessing, goodness, strength, health, wholeness, forgiveness, pours down upon us. And the question is, are we going to live with hands open or arms folded? And so many of us, we have these blessings pouring down upon us, and we live with our arms folded. And in my understanding, spiritual practices are simply the humble ways that we open our hands. Yeah. So do spiritual practices cause God to do anything? Not at all. God does. God is already doing what God does.
Yeah.
But spiritual disciplines just help us put us in the flow to receive what's already happening.
What I think is unique about the book, and what I think is really helpful, is we live in such a busy world, such a one thing to the next. And now you've moved to New York City, so you probably are even getting a whole nother tast of busy. You can even hear the noises around us sometimes of the sirens. And it can be hard when, even if you're living in a rural space, but you work 60 hours a week and you have a family you come home to of 5, and I have 3 children and they want my attention and work wants my attention and my friends want my attention, and I'm trying to also be disciplined in, things like fitness, things like nutrition, and so much of your mental energy is being, put in these places. You're a student, so you also have books you're reading, I would assume, papers you're writing, tests you're taking. And so tell me a little bit about how you've seen value in remaining disciplined in your spiritual practices, and maybe explain a little bit about what your daily rhythm is like, because you have children, you're married, you're in seminary, you're also, you were at BioLogos, I think, just the other day, you're traveling, you're doing a lot of things. So I guess maybe share with some people who feel like, I love that idea, that really resonates with me, but I'm just too busy.
Yeah.
Well,
if you're saying that, it's probably true.
Yeah.
You probably are too busy.
You are, yeah.
And I say that from experience.
Yeah.
So let me say 2 opposite things.
Yeah.
The first one is, what's the great, the rabbis used to teach, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah.
Which I think is such a painful and beautiful reality. So we just moved to Manhattan 4 months ago. In some ways, it changed everything. In some ways, it changed nothing. It's still me.
Yeah.
with all the glory and brokenness of me, wherever you go, there you are. So I think there is an element, whatever season, when we're traveling a lot, when we're home a lot, when we're bored, when we're overwhelmed, there is a sense where the invitation is the same. And it is that inner stillness that we can cultivate largely through these practices that we take anywhere, which we all know the opposite is true. You can be on a beach on vacation and your inner life is tumultuous and stressed out. And so yeah, I think the first truth is wherever we go, there we are. The externals are not actually the whole story.
Yeah.
But the other truth is the externals matter. I mean, if I work, I've had seasons where I lose myself in a project. It's usually, we all do it in different ways. For me, it's usually a creative project. Like if I'm ever doing a recording project, that's what I can do 100 hours a week.
Yeah.
And, not take care of myself, not eat good meals, not talk to my family. And, I can really lose myself in that. And it's really hard to cultivate an inner sense of peace when our externals are bonkers. So I think there's some sort of tension there, not waiting for our externals to be utopia. Someday, when I can order my life that way, then I can be open to God.
Yeah.
That someday's never going to happen.
Yeah.
What we have is today. Where is God? God is here today. And to hold that intention with the reality that how we order our days actually does matter. So
That's good.
Yeah.
Would you say Sabbath has been a good practice for you, or like taking intentional rest and pause, and like what are some other practices? I mean, I know you list many practices in the book,
yeah.
and obviously some of those are corporate practices that are that took place in community.
Yep.
Can you share briefly about some just like, and I want to be careful because some practices may resonate really well with you, and your practices aren't the practices that everyone should order their life around. But just curious what your rhythm is like, and I'm sure it's ever changing, and you just moved, so that's probably part in some ways of the change.
Well, let me start with a confession.
Yeah.
Since now we're friends, talking for a minute. Sabbath, the practice of Sabbath.
Yeah.
Holding 24 hours every week aside has been the most helpful practice that I have not been able to sustain for any amount of time.
I would probably say the same
Would you
about
really?
me personally. Yeah. Well, there was
Yeah.
a season probably, I want to say like 5 or 6 years ago, where I got really good at it.
Okay.
And that was largely because maybe it was even longer than 5 or 6 years ago. Rob Bell was talking a lot about it at that time, or at least when I was listening to him at that time, I was listening to a lot of his talks on that, and hearing the importance of it, the rhythm of it. And I was really coming into work more refreshed and even more mentally open and just flowing way better. And so I was even seeing like productive value in pausing. Like, does that make sense? So
absolutely.
But then when everything goes haywire and you start having kids, and like we'd already had maybe I think one of our kids at that point, but then when you throw 2 and 3 into the mix, and you're, and so I would agree that like it's one of those practices I've been very inconsistent about. And it's also hard as a pastor because do you take it on Saturday when you're mentally getting ready for Sunday, or do you take it on Monday when you're like, okay, how do I figure out my Monday routine? And so like I have pastor friends who are all over the map on where they take it in the week and what's best for their particular rhythms. But yeah, I totally resonate with that confession.
For me, it had to be after, whenever I would carve out that time, it had to be after the service I was responsible for.
Definitely. I get that.
So it was really hard to unplug when I know Sunday's coming.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been one that, again, it's so weird where you experience the almost nuclear benefit of something. And then for some reason, I haven't been able to sustain it for long periods of time. So maybe I just start with a confession there. I think some of my rhythm is mornings are when it needs to happen.
Yeah.
And there's something about opening the day where it's almost like I get out of the way of my life for a bit of time, and I just open up. And right now, I actually, we're in the building that I live. Our apartment is just right over there, and I have a window that looks out on the skyline, and I sit there, have my coffee. I have an app that is called iMissile, not like a bomb missile, but the missile, AL. And what it does is it has each day's lectionary readings read for you.
Oh, okay. So you just get to listen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that has changed for me. I've been, as a good evangelical, I've been reading scripture every morning and doing that whole thing. And it got into an unhelpful place for me. I actually had to take a break from the Bible for a while.
You talk a little bit about that in the book, like how your regular quiet time practices and stuff like that.
It was really, really helpful until it wasn't.
Yeah.
And I had let it turn into something it was never meant to be. But in this season, listening to the text being read and the lectionary text, so I don't choose it. It's what Christians all over the planet are reading today, has been really beautiful. Yeah. And so I usually begin there, and then when that's finished, I just do a little bit of silence. Sometimes I'm trying to listen, did something that was read, is it resonating with me? And other times it's just exhaling. One of my favorite translations of Our Father who art in heaven is Our Father who fills the atmosphere, Our Father who is closer than the air we breathe.
Yeah.
And so so many of the spiritual practices, especially the contemplative practices, involve our breath.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'll just notice my breath filling up my lungs and just be reminded again, God is closer than the air I breathe. And it's beautiful. I can usually tell how well my soul is going by how long I stay in that place. When I'm real frazzled, if I can do 2 minutes of that, it's a miracle. But when there's seasons of being a little more grounded, I'm able to just stay in that place. And you really get the sense, all shall be well.
Yeah. Would you describe that as kind of like a meditative practice of sorts? Yeah.
Yeah. Breath prayer is at the practice. Breath prayer is one of the practices that we spend a lot of time with.
Yeah.
And
which in evangelicalism is a little bit like, be afraid. Like I grew up with a lot of like, be afraid of that. Whereas meditation, I think it's so valuable, and it's like it physically actually like opens you. Like,
yes.
Like I think I've experienced that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is part of our Christian tradition.
Yes, it is, yeah.
It is we recent evangelicals who left part of that tradition. This is not a new weird thing.
Yeah.
Modern evangelicalism is a new weird thing.
So that's maybe a good pivot into one of the things I appreciated about the book was like your rhythm of taking the reader through your deconstruction, then reconstruction, then deconstruction, then reconstruction. And you didn't necessarily label it that, but I sensed, as also being a pastor who's been through seasons where I've deconstructed certain things and reconstructed, but then been like, I don't know what I think about this reconstruction. Maybe there's some other parts that need to change. Obviously, you're in seminary now, so I'm sure you're even hearing new ideas or adopting new understandings. But how... Talk a little bit about your deconstruction journey, but then also maybe talk to people who are currently in the mode of deconstruction. Maybe they don't even know if they believe there's a God anymore. Maybe they don't know. How have the spiritual practices been helpful for you to remain tethered even in times of doubt, which I think is that's one of the values of the practices.
Absolutely. Oh man, there's a lot of questions in there.
Sorry.
There's so many things I want to say. Well, maybe just to begin, like we were talking before we started recording, like my faith imploded. And I mentioned that briefly, but just, I was a worship leader leading songs that I really didn't think I believed anymore. And it was very difficult, very complicated when your paycheck is connected to the faith that is crumbling. And so, this whole book is not like a mental exercise. Like, it'd be interesting to think. No. This was spiritual life and death for me. This was. either there is a more beautiful way forward, or I'm done with the whole thing.
Yeah.
And again, I'm just so grateful that there is a way forward, and it's actually better. This is so weird. I have a very conflicted relationship with evangelicalism right now, but I've never been more thankful to be a Christian than I am right now. And I'm not a particularly good one, but the way of Jesus is so compelling. I mean, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Yeah. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are that's the way.
Yeah.
If our world has any chance, that's the way.
Yeah.
And so I think to your question about the practices, I think I will do any practice, Christian or otherwise, that aligns me with that vision that Jesus laid out for the world.
Sure, that's good.
And so, fortunately, there are all these Christian practices that help us live out Jesus's way. And so those have been wildly helpful. To your question about the deconstruction, reconstruction, that whole thing, I think a lot of it started for me when I realized that my particular faith tradition is really good, but not even close to enough. And I think both of those truths were important because, so many of my friends are pitching their whole faith.
Yeah, same.
Not just their specific faith tradition, the whole thing. Because they've rightly seen that it's broken, it's partial, it's flawed, but then they lose all the good of it also. Yeah. And so I have a chapter in the book that the whole chapter is about include and transcend.
Yep.
And that simple idea, that's actually both a Christian idea and a Buddhist idea. The include and transcend, realizing that our journey up to this point is critically important, but we can't stay here. It's like third grade, right? Third grade is brilliant when you're 8, and it's so necessary. And you learn so many important things that bring you to 4th grade. But you've got to move to 4th grade. But what you don't do in 4th grade is say, 3rd grade sucks. Everything I learned there was a lie. No. You bring everything from 3rd grade into the bigger space of 4th grade. And so, as we all come from a different vantage point. So I came from the white evangelical conservative stream. And I could talk for an hour about the parts of that stream that are beautiful and that are good. I'm at an Episcopalian seminary right now, and I'm noticing, wow, I'm really thankful for that part of my upbringing, just being in a different context. On the flip side, I could talk for an hour on the parts of my upbringing that I've not only needed to let go, but I want to fight against. And so it's very complicated. Yeah. And when I'm frazzled and stressed and angry, I do include and transcend poorly. It's just transcend and blow up, right? But when there are seasons where I can get grounded, where it's not about vengeance on all those people who lied to me. When I can see, wait, they were handed a really messed up story, and they handed it to me. And let's be honest, I'm handing part of that to my kids too. And so can I forgive the people who taught me this poor story with the same grace I'm hoping my kids can forgive me, 15 years down the line. So, to sum up that, to receive the gifts of my faith tradition, to let go of the parts that are toxic and broken, and to include the good into a new, bigger, and more beautiful future. That's what I long for.
And that's so much what this podcast is about, beyond boundaries, meaning moving beyond the boundaries that our tribe ascribes
Yeah,
for us.
that's
like,
right.
I
Yeah.
mean, you grew up in a tribe that ascribed, these are the boundaries, don't
Yep.
go outside the boundaries. If you
That's
go
right.
outside the boundaries, you're done. Like,
Yeah.
or you're out of God's
so
will or
true.
whatever. And then
Yep.
the moment you go outside the boundaries, you're like, actually, it's not that terrible out here.
Yeah, I know.
And I think that's when we tend to get very black and white.
Yeah.
At that moment,
Yeah.
because when like you had said, you have friends and I have friends who have gone outside those boundaries and realized, actually, it's more authentic and real out
Yeah.
here than it's ever
That's right.
been inside.
That's
and like,
right.
I want to go back inside. There's parts of inside
Yeah.
that's not too bad, but if it's at the sake of like having actually authentic, real relationships with people
Yeah.
and being in community for real, like, not that everybody would voice it like that. Some of them have real hurts that it'd be voiced very differently, right?
Sure.
But they've gone outside the boundaries. They felt that exclusion, and now they're just like, well, I'm just going to toss it all out.
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about in the chapter that is the include and transcend chapter, and you mentioned this multiple times throughout, and you have a Plymouth Brethren background, so you have
Yeah.
an Anabaptist a
Yeah,
little bit,
yeah,
and your
yeah.
background is a third way, like which I think is really
Yes.
valuable right
Yep.
now. And I think as I look, especially at the younger generation, talking 35 and under, like, we're looking for a third way through conflict. We live in such a binary world in our politics, in our churches, in our communities. It's so everything's so divisive, and you always have to choose a side. You can never be about both.
That's right.
I think so much of what you're talking about in that chapter, but also throughout the book, is about even the spiritual practice of saying, what does it look like for us to choose sides less and to champion a third way?
Sure.
And again, this is the spiritual practice of following Jesus. Jesus was consistently championing third ways in a very binary world.
Yep.
So what are some third ways or some ways that you remain centered on a third way like approach to the world? Because that's something that I struggle with,
it's so
especially
good. Of course.
especially when so much is on the line. Like you can feel like I'm trying to lead a community, or I'm trying to lead my family, or I'm trying, and I want them to know right from wrong. But then you're like, but I also want to be inclusive, and I want to help people understand. And and so it can get really hard to commit to that third way. But tell me a little bit about what you've learned on that journey.
3 things come to mind right away. First of all, just to name, the conservatives don't have a monopoly on fundamentalism.
Yeah.
And there is fundamentalism in every camp.
Yeah.
And that's been disillusioning. I think I had an idealism that if I could just get out of the super conservative fundamentalism, I could be in this really open space. The far left is not always very open.
Yeah.
And so we all have our work to do.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say about the both and is, I think it's really important to not confuse the third way with some sort of neutral middle position.
Yeah, that's good.
The third way between, I mean, I'll just pick something that
Go
I
ahead.
hope
Yeah.
everyone can agree on.
Good luck with that.
Well, but I mean, the neo-Nazis
maybe.
marching. I would hope that's one that.
Sure.
We're not looking for a third way between the neo-Nazis and those who are working for justice.
Yeah.
We're looking for justice.
Yes.
So,
but there is a third way approach to how you talk about people, right?
Absolutely a third way approach. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to name what we're not saying is everybody's equally right.
Yeah.
So let's just have a position that allows everyone to be equally right.
Yeah.
There are some things that are wrong. I still believe in right and wrong,
Yeah.
even as things are widening. So, but to your point, I hope I don't approach right and wrong the way I did in my more fundamentalist days.
Definitely.
You asked about practices.
Yeah.
2 come to mind really quickly. One will probably sound obvious, but is harder to practice, and it's just we've got to get out of our little closed circles. We have got to not just hear about the other, but to be at tables with the other, to be in relationship with the other. And even if we can't get there immediately, to be reading books from the other. That's how it started for me.
Yeah.
I mean, where I grew up, Catholics weren't even going to be in heaven. I mean, they weren't even Christians. Yeah.
Same. Yeah.
And so for me, in beginning to engage the Catholic Church was reading Catholic authors. And I'm like, this is unbelievable. This is changing my life. This is helping me walk with Christ more. Maybe I need to get to know a Catholic. Maybe I need to get to. So it can begin with reading, and a lot of times that's a good first step, but it has to move to tables, to partnership, to getting our kids together. Not just fellow Christians. I mean, I'm embarrassed there were many Christians I wouldn't, connect with. But then beyond interfaith and our Muslim brothers and sisters. And, oh, man, I could tell you some stories in Chicago.
I just got back from Israel and Palestine.
You did?
I was there from March 1st to March 14th.
No way.
Yeah, I was there with Mennonite Central Committee. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they've been there since like the 40s, and it was like a learning tour, and so we spent a lot of time in Palestine. I mean, on both sides of the conflict, but it was pretty eye-opening.
Oh yeah,
especially coming from a conservative background, obviously, right? And I loved what you had mentioned in the book about being pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, and pro-peace.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that it seems like when you're on the ground there, that window of those three options just keeps getting smaller and smaller by the realities that are happening there. And so much of history can shape the possibility for peace. Not that I would ever remove the chance for a miracle or the chance for something amazing to take place, but when you're thrust into those situations, and you've been there too multiple times, right? That's what I heard in the book. So you've seen it. But in big conflicts like that, but also in small, trying to consider one of the things I thought was really good about being there was hearing a perspective and trying to pause and understand it and be compassionate for it when I was like, I don't know that I think that's okay, but I want to sit here. We were actually at a table with somebody, I want to hear what you have to say. Yeah. I'm going to challenge it a little bit, but I also want to try to understand your worldview. And we were talking about settlements and stuff, and obviously there's a variety of views on these things. And I'm going to be publishing a lot of stuff on that, so you can follow that on my website. But we were talking to a rabbi, and for a moment he talked about his daughter and the fear of missiles coming in from Gaza. Yeah. And in that moment I was like, you know what? I have a daughter.
Yep. That's exactly right. Yep.
I don't know that I think these settlements and what's happening and kind of some of the land grabbing that's taking place is really helping in any way move this conflict toward peace. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
But I can understand a father being concerned for the safety of his daughter, and even the psychological concern of my daughter being concerned. My daughter doesn't have to be concerned walking to school about a missile. Does that make sense? That's not a concern I've ever had to have as a father. And so it shapes, I think leading with compassion has been something that's really trying to sit with people and be like, okay, one of the practices is okay, I have my perspective, but how do I try to come to empathize with the perspective of the other?
So good.
And that's the one thing I think, while evangelicalism did teach me a lot about truth, a lot about even practical love. There was a lot of service we did. There was a lot of missions work we did. There was a lot. It didn't always teach me well how to empathize. Yeah. And especially with people I disagree with. Sure. It usually just taught me they're wrong. Yeah. So
let's try to convert them to our way.
Let's try to convert them to rightness. And so I think one of the things I'm learning, and it seems like you're learning, or you've been on this journey as well, is how to connect more honestly with the other.
Yeah, it's so good.
And I think it's so valuable, right?
I mean, I love your example. It's such an extreme, but totally universal example. I mean, when growing up in American Christianity, we thought Israel were the good guys, and then there was a bunch of terrorists who were kind of like animals. All right? So that was the first. And then you get over there, and you see some of the oppressive policies of the Israeli government. Yeah. And then if you're on an unbalanced tour, which my first tour was a little unbalanced.
Okay.
I started saying, wait, the Palestinians are the good guys. The state of Israel, they're
Yeah.
But then you go and just like I've had that same experience. Then you sit with some Israeli brothers and sisters, and you're like, they're just like us, and they have the history of their people being one of the most, if not the most, oppressed people in human history.
Yeah.
So they carry. I mean. Oh,
it was a wave of emotions on that
really
trip
was.
because it was you would be at a refugee camp in Palestine and hearing their perspective, and then you'd be at the Holocaust Museum, and then you'd be at then you'd be sitting with the rabbi, then you'd be and then you'd be at a holy site, and you'd be supposed to be pausing and being reflecting.
Right,
like it's hard for me to sit here and be like, oh, this is so powerful right now when I'm processing all of these emotions. But it was.
Can I just say for anyone listening?
Yeah.
If you have the opportunity to go on a dual narrative Middle East trip.
Got to do it that way if you do it. Yeah.
It is a life-changing experience. And you can mention the one you did. It sounded
MCC,
like it was great.
But who you mentioned someone in the book.
The Telos group.
Telos group, okay. Which I haven't had a chance to look into, but I want to.
I will completely derail the podcast by
give
talking
like 60
about
seconds
Telos.
on it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Telos is started by Todd Dethridge, who served in the George W. Bush White House. He was the Condoleezza Rice's chief of staff.
Oh, wow.
So Republican, Christian American Republican, partnered with Greg Khalil, who is of Palestinian descent, and he was actually a part of he's a lawyer, part of the Palestinian negotiation team.
Okay.
And they've both come to the same conclusion, which is either it's going to be justice for both, or it's going to be justice for neither.
Yeah.
Zero sum will blow up the world.
Yeah.
And so they've started this Telos group, and like you mentioned, it's pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-peace.
I love that.
And it's the most compelling thing, and it's difficult, and it's complicated, but that's what you're describing is exactly what they do. Yeah. They say, we will meet with anyone short of those who choose violence on either side.
That's MCC's mission as well, is to say, like, we want to meet with peacemakers on both sides. So, like, they're doing things even like just getting women on both sides together to share recipes and cook together, which is really good, because one of the things that was really alarming to me is, you have the wall now, and if you're an Israeli wanting to go into Palestinian territory, you're not allowed.
Yes.
It's against the law. And then there's also all kinds of warnings, like you'll get killed if you go on the other side of this wall. Like they're all terrorists. I mean, they don't say it exactly like that, but that's definitely what they're trying to communicate to you. If you go over there, you're going to get killed. And so the moment you actually start to realize, hold on, those people over there are just like us. They're cooking meals for their family. I mean, we were in Palestinian areas that were rough areas, as far as like you could tell were rough. But like we felt 100% safe. It wasn't the most hospitable people ever. We actually we had stayed in hotels, but we also had homestays. So we actually stayed with people. And like, they're the most hospitable people. Honestly, it was like, I'm okay. I got everything I need. I'm good. They're just trying to feed you and trying to.
Can I tell one fun story?
Do it. Yeah.
This is such a serious topic, but one of the trips we were there, we were actually doing some music. And so there were a number of us musicians. I see you wearing a Gungor shirt. David Gungor was one of the guys.
Oh, really?
There.
Awesome.
And there were 4 of us in the band. And so we did rehearsals all day, and then we didn't have to play till the next day. So that night we said, we're in Bethlehem, which is Palestinian territory. And so we said, let's take a taxi in and let's find a place to get some drinks, get some falafel, maybe find a hookah. Let's just do it. We're here. So we jump in a taxi and we start driving. And the guy realizes, obviously, we're Americans. We didn't blend in very well.
Sure.
And so he's messing with his radio. And he finally gets to the right thing. And it's, is it Backstreet Boys? Ain't nothing but tell me why. That whole song. He starts playing, and we're in the back, and we put arms around each other. We're singing at the top of our lungs, going through the West Bank, singing Backstreet Boys. And then we weren't there yet when the song ended, and he reached down, started it over. Same song. So we did it again, and we were singing in the backseat. And it was such a human moment. It was such a human
just a bunch of your friends,
just
in
with
what
this
a lot of people see as like a war zone,
brother.
like,
Yeah.
and it is
Right.
at times, but like,
And
it's
he
people.
saw us as Americans, and he's like, let's have some fun.
Yeah.
And it's fun to have those moments of just belly laughing too.
And the hard thing for me, and the thing I brought back that probably like is still something I'm processing because I've only been back for a couple weeks, is like when I talk to Palestinians and ask, what changes this? They said, you have more power to change this than I do as an American citizen.
Yep.
And then you're like, oh.
Yep.
Oh, and they, in their mind, they're like, until the broader international community sees what you've seen, this isn't changing. And that's been their experience, and that's unfortunate to some degree.
Let's push a little more into specificity. Very often it's America vetoing action.
Yep.
And who's the strongest American voting bloc that supports that?
Well, it's Zionism within the evangelical community that's really...
Yes, it's white evangelicals.
It's white evangelicals and the Zionistic kind of theology that we're handed. And I think that... Though what's really difficult about that, too, is like in the Palestinian side, you have 20% Christian.
Yeah.
And in the Israeli side, I mean, and I'm not saying we should choose sides based on whether one side's Christian or not, but it's like the side we've been taught to see as terrorists, which I'm not saying there's not terrorists on that side.
Of course.
But I guess what I'm saying is that side, 1 in 5 people you meet on that side are Christians. We attended 2 different churches on that side and went to their services and being in that space, it's like, wow, these are our brothers and sisters over here in the midst of this conflict, and many are so almost like landlocked by the wall or by other things and unemployment and all this. So
we met some kids who talked about it as an open air prison. They say we live in an open air prison.
Wow,
we're surrounded by this wall. We cannot ever leave.
Yeah,
it's pretty intense.
It is pretty intense.
Let me. I think this is kind of connected to that.
Yeah,
but it's the second part of answering your question about what do we do to move into the both and?
Yeah.
And I think if there was one practice that I would recommend, because it's been one of the most difficult and freeing ones for me, it's forgiveness. It's praying it's choosing to pray for my enemy instead of destroy them. It's choosing, when I'm obsessed with the person who's wronged me, I am not ever choosing a third way path on anything. Yeah. It like infects everything when we're covered with, soaked in resentment.
Yeah.
And so, the Lord's Prayer, do you know the verse after the Lord's Prayer in Matthew's account is, if you do not forgive, then God will not forgive you.
Yeah.
If you don't forgive others, God will not forgive you.
We don't hold that very dogmatically in the church.
Are you kidding me? What does that mean? Yeah. And I think for me, it's a lot more complicated than this.
Sure.
But one of the ways that has really helped me with both that verse, but also just this whole idea is, if we stop the flow of grace outward, we are stopping the flow of grace inward.
Yeah.
Like it's both or it's neither.
And to use the eternal current metaphor, it's like you're damming the grace of God coming in.
Exactly
like you're building up a dam here, and it's not coming in now because you've chosen you've chosen in some ways to be the unmerciful servant, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's another space where we talk about forgiveness, the value of that to not keep this weight of like books that tell you who's right or wrong, and like how you relate to them based on that. So forgiveness could do a lot in that space.
So I just know for me, when I'm weighted down by unforgiveness, it affects my entire life. Yeah. Even not connected to that situation, it affects everything. And I mentioned this in the book, but I came in to my spiritual director a couple years ago, and I just was explaining, there's someone that I'm like having conversations with them, like in the shower, I'm thinking about what I should have said, like that whole thing.
Yeah.
And he said, can I teach you a simple practice of forgiveness? And he taught me this 4-part practice. And I said, okay, well, I'll try to do that this week. And he goes, let's do it now. And I'm like, I don't want to do it now. I don't want. But he guided me through this, and I've done it many times since. And it's just a very simple way of learning how to let go, learning how to let this person off the hook, learning how to let the grace begin to flow toward them so that it can begin flowing back toward me also. So, forgiveness is so central.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Last question.
Yeah.
So there's probably a lot of people listening to this who might have families, maybe even young families.
Yeah.
What are some ways, if I'm a parent listening to this, that I'm like, spiritual practices, these are valuable, but how do I make it communal for my family? And you talk a little bit about this in the book.
Yep.
I definitely want to encourage everybody. I mean, I listened to this book. I do Audible. So I listened to this book and it was really, really great, really fabulous. So highly encourage you to go get the book.
Yeah.
But maybe give parents a couple of things they can consider that might be handles for them to even just start to build the value of spiritual practices into their children. Because obviously you and I had some of that because in evangelicalism, quiet time was emphasized, prayer was emphasized. There were certain things that were spiritual practices that were emphasized. But just share a little bit about how you're doing that even now, or what you would recommend to a parent who came to you and was like, what do I do?
Such a good question. Obviously, one part of spiritual discipline is getting alone, but our spiritual disciplines can't only be when we leave the family. Yeah. Like we have to find ways for our kids' sake that we include them in some of these practices. And so there's two particular ones that we've been doing with our boys. One is kind of a modified examen. And I won't go through the whole, what is the examen for those who aren't familiar. But
you do lay that out
in the book.
Yeah.
But we do a really simple version, which is kind of high-low of the day. What's one moment today that you felt completely like yourself, alive, full of gratitude? And what's one moment where you didn't, where something happened that hurt you? And we often do it at dinner. And we go around, and even the 7-year-old, for when he was like 5, it was like mostly fiction, about this superhero that flew in, But now at 7, he's able to begin sharing, and the 12-year-old, I mean, he shares some very significant things. Sure. But what I love about it, it gives us a chance together to hold our days
to connect
for each other and connect. But it also normalizes the difficult parts of life.
Oh, that's good.
I think I had moments growing up. I have great parents, but I had moments growing up where if I had something bad going on, I don't want to wreck dinner, or that's not really what this is for. And so you wait till it's crisis, and then you drop the crisis on the family. And they're like, why didn't you tell us before? What I love about this practice is it's just a very simple way every single day to name one thing. And so as parents, then we can be listening like, wow, he's shared a real similar thing for a while now. I'm going to follow up on that. So that's been a great practice. The other one that's been really surprising is our practice community on Sunday nights. We started praying the Lord's Prayer with these simple hand gestures. And it sounds weird, but the whole idea is a lot of us in our community spend so much of our faith in our brain. Yeah. Like it's so cerebral, we're really disconnected from our bodies, and we're trying to figure out how to be holistic human beings again. Yeah. Not to mention holistic Christians. And, so we just use these simple hands open, hands raised way of praying the Lord's Prayer. And I was telling the boys about that one night before bed, and I'm like, well, can I teach you guys? And they're like, yeah. So I teach them, okay, our Father, we hold our hands like this, who art in heaven, we lift up our hand, And now we do it most nights.
That's great.
And when we have guests over, a lot of times boys, come on in. Would you teach the guests the gestures for the Lord's Prayer? And we'll, before dinner, we'll all pray the Lord's Prayer. And it has been profoundly meaningful.
That's awesome.
There are times where we're watching our boys pray this, and Sean and I will just get tears like, it's just really beautiful.
It's powerful when you see your kids start to get it. Like
Yes.
I say a blessing over our kids. May the
Do
Lord
you really?
bless you and
Oh,
keep
yeah.
you. May
Yeah.
the Lord make
Yep.
his face shine upon you and be gracious towards you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Like I say that over my kids as they go to
Beautiful.
sleep. So from Numbers,
Yep. Yep.
But then my middle son Beckett started asking me to like add stuff to it. And so now I say, no bad dreams, only good dreams. No bad imagination, only good imagination. No bad thoughts, only good thoughts. No bad real life, only good real life. Amen. On top of it, because these are things he's added, right?
Of course.
So I've watched him and observed him, and he'll literally like at times say the blessing over his stuffed animals. And I'm like, this is awesome. Amazing. This is so cool. This is so cool to see it. And even while I was in Israel and Palestine, I had to like record it so that Brittany could go and and show it to the kids when they were going to bed. But it's like, So it's been really awesome to have those practices. I think whatever fits your family though, like that's the big thing. Like I think one of the things I've learned is like other people have given me practice ideas where I'm like, oh, that sounds really great. Let's do it. And then you're like, and sometimes it's a matter of like, okay, we need enough repetition of this and it'll get normal. But other times it's like, okay, we tried enough repetition. It's not working with the rhythm of our life, and it's just not working for our family, and it's not catching on. Because I mean, while I do think it should be a discipline, and discipline requires, creating a discipline requires discipline, but it also should form into a habit, after a while, right? It should become habitual, and so that's so good, so good.
Not every practice is meant for every person, obviously.
I think that's
important.
So
we try things and. Yeah, and you're right. You have to stick with it a little bit because the first time almost never works. Yeah. But at a certain point, to just be able to let go is helpful.
That's great. Aaron, thank you so much for being on with me.
Thanks for coming
if people want to find out more about you, follow you, obviously they can get your book. We'll put the link in the show notes, and we'll also put a link to your website and your other stuff. But tell a little bit about some of the stuff and ways that they can connect with you and follow you.
Well, the website, aaronniequist.com, is where I'm trying to collect the different projects. So the book is there. I've been working on a project called A New Liturgy for a number of years, which are just these 15 to 25-minute recorded journeys of prayer, song. And actually, maybe 3 weeks ago, just released a lament liturgy.
Oh, wow.
And it's for free.
Okay.
So it was too, how do you charge people for lament? So I just like put it out there.
There's enough of that in life. How can I charge people for this?
But it's the whole idea is if we don't learn constructive practices to deal with our heartbreak, we're going to blow up our lives and we're going to blow up the world. And so this is just following the tradition of lament, where we're able to hold our heartbreaks in God's presence. And David Gungor actually he sang the main song on it.
Oh, awesome!
And did a lot of the guitar work. And I'm really excited about it. If you can be excited about lament, well, if you can, I'm excited about this project. So it's free download for anybody who wants.
I'll put a link in the show notes to that exactly. Good. So and they can follow you on Twitter and on Instagram,
Twitter, Insta, and still Facebook.
Still Facebook. You're still there, holding it down. Oh, very good.
Aaron Niequest is the Twitter handle.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Aaron.
Yeah.
Another episode down. I want to thank Aaron Niequest for being with me today. Go buy his book now. Seriously, go buy it. The Eternal Current. I listened to it on Audible, actually. It's a great audiobook. If you're into audiobooks, it's a great one to have. So go to aaronniequist.com and stay connected to the many things that Aaron is doing. Also, go check out anewliturgy.com and make sure you listen to the episode Aaron referenced on lament. It was great to have you with me today on Beyond Boundaries. If you want to learn more about me or find the show notes, which, by the way, the show notes of this episode have all the links that I just mentioned above to Aaron's stuff. But you can find all of that at pastorjustindouglas.com. You can interact there with feedback, comments, and questions, or you can reach out to me via Instagram. I'm at Pastor Justin Douglas. Please consider subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing. It really does make a difference. May you go and live a life that is beyond boundaries, giving others love, exploring new ideas, and championing belonging.